My wife's friend got pregnant because of me. I never thought I'd end up here, sitting in my car at 2 a.m., staring blankly at the empty street outside, trying to make sense of the whirlwind my life had become. But that's the thing about life, right? You never see it coming until it hits you like a truck. I guess I should start at the beginning. How Emily and I went from being the couple everyone envied to, well, whatever this mess is now. We met in our 20s, back when I still had a full head of hair and endless optimism. Emily was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Smart, gorgeous, passionate. I worked in IT, and she was a teacher, always so full of energy and ambition. I loved that about her, the way she seemed to attack life. We got married young, maybe too young, but I was convinced we had something special. It wasn't just love. It was intense, like a fire that could never burn out. But as they say, life happens. Somewhere between the late-night feeds for our 2 kids, the endless bills, and my job swallowing every last bit of my energy, things shifted. I started working more and more, trying to keep up with the financial strain, while Emily stopped teaching and decided to stay home with the kids. We figured it made sense. Her dream was to raise our children, and I could support the family. Except, nothing is ever as simple as it sounds. I remember the first time I noticed things weren't quite right between us. It was subtle at first. Emily started getting on my nerves more than usual. It wasn't anything dramatic, just small things. The way she'd nag about me being home late, or how she'd make passive-aggressive comments about how I never helped enough with the kids. I chalked it up to stress. I mean, who wouldn't be stressed with 2 young kids and a house to manage? But then it got worse. She'd accuse me of not caring anymore, of not being emotionally present. Meanwhile, I felt like I was doing everything I could just to keep our lives running smoothly. I was working long hours, trying to make sure we could keep the roof over our heads, but she didn't see it that way. To Emily, I was distant, unfeeling, cold. We'd argue about the stupidest things. I'd come home, exhausted after a 12-hour day, and the first thing she'd do was pick a fight about why I hadn't texted her back at lunch. Lunch? I didn't even have time to eat half the time, let alone answer a pointless text. But every argument, every fight seemed to push us further apart. I felt like I couldn't do anything right in her eyes. And honestly, I stopped trying. Around that time, I started hanging out more with Kate, Emily's best friend. I know how that sounds, but back then, it was completely innocent. Kate was always around because she and Emily were close, and with her own messed-up relationship history, she kind of understood where I was coming from. We'd chat at family gatherings, or when she came over for dinner. I found it easy to talk to her. She didn't judge or accuse, unlike Emily. And then Emily got pregnant. Unexpectedly. I don't know how to explain it, but instead of feeling joy or excitement, I felt trapped. The timing was all wrong. We were already teetering on the edge of disaster, and now we were having another child? But Emily, she was ecstatic. It was like she saw the pregnancy as some magical solution to all our problems. She started treating me differently, manipulating me in ways I hadn't noticed before. She'd talk about how we needed to be a family, how I needed to step up now that another baby was on the way. But all I could feel was this heavy weight in my chest, this sinking realization that I was stuck. She threw a big celebration for the pregnancy, invited all our friends and family over to announce the news like we'd just won the lottery. I'll never forget that day. Emily was glowing, beaming as she made her speech, telling everyone how excited we were to expand our family. And me? I stood in the corner, a glass of whiskey in hand, smiling like an idiot, nodding along while my inside screamed. I didn't want another kid. I didn't even know if I wanted to be with her anymore. And here she was, making sure I had no way out. I remember looking across the room and locking eyes with Kate. She gave me this small, knowing smile, as if she could see right through the facade. And maybe she could. After the party, as the guests started to leave and Emily basked in the afterglow of her announcement, I slipped outside for a smoke. Kate followed. "You all right?" she asked, leaning against the porch railing. There was something comforting about the way she spoke. Calm, understanding, no judgment. I shrugged. Does it look like I'm all right? She didn't push, just stood there quietly, letting the silence stretch between us. It was the first time in a long time that someone wasn't expecting something from me. I lit another cigarette, the smoke swirling into the cold night air. "It's not what you wanted, huh?" she finally said, her voice low, almost a whisper. I shook my head. Not even close. We stood there for a while, just two people who'd seen too much, heard too much. She didn't need to say anything more, and I didn't have the energy to explain. All I knew was that something had changed that night. I wasn't sure what, but it was there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to take over. From that point on, things between Emily and me only got worse. The fights became more frequent, more vicious. She'd throw things, plates, glasses, words that cut deeper than any of it. She'd accuse me of everything under the sun, and I just shut down. There was no point in fighting back. She was like a storm, uncontrollable, and I was just trying not to drown. And Kate? Well, let's just say that the more Emily pushed me away, the closer Kate and I became. After that party, things started to shift in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on. The distance between Emily and me felt like a chasm that grew wider every day. But Kate? She was there more than ever. It wasn't like we were sneaking around or anything, at least not yet. But the more Emily pulled away, the closer I found myself gravitating toward Kate. It was like she became the only person who actually saw me. It started small. After that talk on the porch, Kate and I began texting more. She'd send me the occasional funny meme or ask how I was holding up. At first, it was just lighthearted banter. But as Emily's moods became more erratic, angrier, colder, those texts became something I clung to. Kate had been through her own share of relationship hell, and there was something comforting in knowing I wasn't completely alone in this. We started meeting up for coffee during my lunch breaks. Nothing scandalous, just two friends talking about life. I'd unload about the latest fight with Emily, and Kate would listen, offering her usual calm advice. She never took sides, at least not outwardly, but I could see the concern in her eyes whenever I talked about how bad things had gotten. "I don't know how you do it, James," she said one afternoon, stirring sugar into her coffee. "It's like you're being suffocated by her." I leaned back in my chair, letting out a frustrated sigh. I don't even recognize her anymore. She's not the same person I married. Kate frowned, and for a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something but was holding back. Finally, she spoke. "Have you ever thought that maybe there's something else going on with her?" I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know. It's just I've noticed she's been acting strange, more secretive." "Have you?" I shrugged. "She's been a complete nightmare lately, yeah, but I just figured it was the pregnancy hormones or something." Kate gave me a long, steady look before taking a sip of her coffee. "I don't know, James. It's not just that. She's been disappearing a lot, hasn't she? Staying out late, meeting new people." That hit me harder than I expected. Kate wasn't wrong. Emily had been coming home late more often. She'd make vague excuses about meeting old friends or needing space to clear her head. I noticed it, of course, but I was so caught up in trying to survive the daily shitstorm that I hadn't questioned it. "You think she's cheating on me?" I said, my voice flat, like I couldn't even process the possibility. "I don't know, James. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but something feels off. I've seen this kind of behavior before, and I just want you to be aware." I laughed it off at first. "Emily? Cheating on me? No way. She was too focused on manipulating me with this pregnancy. Why would she risk everything like that?" But once Kate planted the seed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started noticing the little things, the details that had slipped by me before. Emily would come home late, claiming she'd been out with some friends I'd never heard of. She was on her phone constantly, her screen tilted away from me whenever I walked by. It ate at me. My gut twisted every time she left the house without a solid explanation. I wanted to confront her, to call her out on her bullshit, but I didn't have proof. And with Emily, I knew better than to pick a fight without evidence. She was like a prosecutor, always ready to twist my words and make me look like the bad guy. Meanwhile, things with Kate kept getting closer. She was the one place I could find peace. Someone who actually listened instead of tearing me down. We started meeting more frequently. Sometimes after work, sometimes on the weekends when Emily took the kids to her parents' place. One evening, after a particularly rough argument with Emily, I called Kate, needing someone to talk to. I had just come home, and Emily was already asleep, probably exhausted from whatever fight she had won this time. Kate suggested I come over. It was nothing new. We'd met up plenty of times, but that night felt different. When I arrived at her place, she poured me a drink, and we settled into the couch. The air between us felt heavier, loaded with things neither of us had said yet. I told her about the fight, how Emily had accused me of not caring, of being checked out, of being a terrible father. The usual stuff. "James, you know none of that's true, right?" Kate said, her voice soft but firm. "Yeah, I know, but it doesn't stop her from saying it." She sighed and looked at me, her eyes full of empathy. "You deserve better than this." For a moment, we just sat there in silence, and I felt something shift. I'm not sure who moved first, but before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't planned. It wasn't premeditated. It just happened. And it felt right, like a release from all the pressure and chaos of my life with Emily. For the first time in ages, I felt like I could breathe. That night with Kate was the start of something I didn't know I needed. It wasn't just about the sex, although that was a big part of it. It was the connection. The way she made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth something. It was like she was everything Emily had stopped being. But the high didn't last long. Because as good as things were with Kate, the situation with Emily kept spiraling. I was convinced there was more to her behavior than just stress. I started paying more attention, watching her when she didn't think I was looking. She was always on her phone, texting constantly, smiling at her screen. It was driving me insane. Then one night, I found the proof I'd been dreading. We had another fight, something stupid, as usual. She stormed off to bed, leaving me in the living room with my own frustration. I needed a drink, something to calm my nerves. But as I walked into the kitchen, I spotted her phone on the counter. The screen lit up with a message. I didn't want to be that guy. The guy who goes through his wife's phone like some jealous, paranoid creep. But something in me snapped. I picked it up, and there it was, messages from a number I didn't recognize, filled with intimate words that made my stomach churn. There was no mistaking it. She was seeing someone else? I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. My hands shook as I read through the messages, each one confirming what I had been trying to deny for weeks. Emily was cheating, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. When I confronted her the next day, she didn't even deny it. She just looked at me with that cold, indifferent stare she had perfected over the past few months. "What did you expect, James? You've been checked out for months," she said, as if that excused everything. I could barely get the words out. How long? Long enough. And that was it. Just like that, I knew our marriage was over. The worst part? I didn't even feel surprised. I had been holding on to a dead thing, hoping it could somehow be revived. But standing there, in the wreckage of our relationship, I realized there was no going back. I was done. And now I had to figure out what the hell to do next. It took me a few days to pull myself together after finding those messages. I'd walk around the house in a daze, replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. The kids were still oblivious, and Emily was acting like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just shattered whatever was left of our marriage. But I couldn't let it go. Every time I saw her, I felt a knot in my stomach, the anger bubbling under the surface. I had to confront her, even though I knew how it would go. Emily always had a way of turning things around, making me the villain, but this time, I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. So, one evening after the kids were in bed, I sat her down in the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I lit a cigarette, trying to steady myself. She glanced at me, clearly annoyed that I was smoking inside. It was just one more thing she'd hold against me, but tonight, I didn't care. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low, but there was no hiding the tension. Emily crossed her arms and leaned back in the chair, her eyes narrowed. "About what?" "About you. About what you've been doing behind my back." There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just the realization that I knew. But she quickly masked it with indifference. "What are you talking about, James?" I took a deep drag, the smoke swirling between us like a barrier I wished I could hide behind. "Don't play dumb, Emily. I saw the messages. I know you're seeing someone else." She sighed, rolling her eyes like I was being overly dramatic. "Oh, here we go. You're going to start accusing me now?" Real original, James. "I'm not accusing you. I'm telling you what I know." I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and I'm done pretending everything is fine." She stared at me for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about lying? About pretending everything is fine? You've been checked out for months, James. You don't even care anymore." There it was, the same tired argument she always threw at me. I'd stopped caring? That was rich, considering she was the one sneaking around behind my back. "This isn't about me not caring," I said, my voice rising. "This is about you cheating on me, lying to my face every single day. Don't you dare try to twist this around." Emily stood up, pacing the kitchen like a predator stalking its prey. "You know what? I'm not even surprised. You've always been so paranoid, so controlling. It's no wonder I had to find someone else. At least he listens to me, unlike you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was justifying it, like I had somehow forced her into someone else's arms. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to keep my composure. "This is bullshit, Emily, and you know it. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes cold. "You think you're going to just walk away from this? From us? You're pathetic, James. If you leave, I'll take the kids, and you'll never see them again. You'll be left with nothing." That hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always known she could be vindictive, but this was a whole new level. "You can't do that," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, a cruel, twisted smile. "Watch me." I stood there, the weight of her words crashing down on me. She had me trapped. No matter what I did, she was going to make sure I paid the price. It wasn't about the kids, it was about control. About her winning, no matter the cost. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Emily slept next to me, like nothing had happened. I felt suffocated, drowning in the reality of my situation. I needed an out, something, anything to make this nightmare end. And that's when my thoughts drifted to Kate. We'd been spending more time together, and it wasn't just friendly anymore. There was something between us, something real. She understood me in a way Emily never could. I found myself thinking about her more and more, the way she made me feel like a human being again, not just some punching bag for Emily's frustrations. The next day, I met Kate at our usual cafe. We sat by the window, the afternoon sun streaming in, but there was an unspoken tension between us. I hadn't told her about the confrontation with Emily yet. I wasn't sure how to bring it up. "Is everything okay?" Kate asked, her voice soft, her hand lightly touching mine on the table. I nodded, but it was a lie. "Not really. I confronted her last night. She denied everything, of course, and then threatened to take the kids if I leave." Kate's eyes widened with concern. "She said that?" "Yeah. She knows she's got me trapped. I can't just walk away." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation hanging between us. Finally, Kate broke the quiet. "You deserve better than this, James." Her words hit me hard, not because they were new, but because I finally believed them. I deserved better. I couldn't keep living like this, with Emily manipulating every part of my life. threatening to tear me apart if I even thought about leaving. As the weeks went on, Kate and I grew closer. We'd spend our weekends together, talking about everything: our dreams, our pasts, the life we wished we could have. I hadn't felt this connected to someone in years. It was easy with her. Simple. She didn't judge me or throw my mistakes in my face. She just understood. One evening, after a long day of dealing with Emily's bullshit, I met Kate at a park near her house. We walked in silence for a while, just enjoying the quiet. Eventually, we found a bench and sat down, watching the sunset paint the sky with soft hues of pink and orange. "I've been thinking," I said, breaking the silence. "Maybe I should just leave, take the kids and go. I can't do this anymore." Kate looked at me, her expression soft but serious. "You don't have to stay with her, James. You deserve to be happy." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was hope. Maybe I could escape this. Maybe there was a way out. Before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, like we both knew where this was headed, but didn't want to ruin the moment. We stayed there for what felt like hours, just the two of us, finally letting go of everything that had been building between us. That night, I went back to her place. We didn't talk much, there was no need. The connection we had went beyond words. It was like she could see inside me, understand everything I was feeling without me having to explain. We ended up in her bed, our bodies tangled together, and for the first time in months, I felt free. Being with Kate wasn't just about the physical intimacy, though that was part of it. It was about feeling like I was worth something again, like I wasn't just a victim of Emily's manipulation. With Kate, I could be myself, but as much as I wanted to stay in that moment forever, reality was waiting for me back home. Emily was still there, still ready to tear me apart if I made a move. And I knew that the hardest part was still to come. The moment Emily found out I was serious about leaving her, everything escalated. She went from cold indifference to full-on warfare. There was no hesitation, no thought of reconciliation, just pure, calculated destruction. And her first move? Filing for child support, as if the ink on the divorce papers had already dried. It wasn't about the money. I would have provided for my kids no matter what. No, this was about power, about control. Emily was creating her victim narrative, painting herself as the poor, abandoned wife left alone with 2 kids and a third on the way. And she was good at it too. The whispers started immediately among her friends, the neighbors, even our family. She made it sound like I had left her high and dry while she was carrying our unborn child. She knew exactly how to twist the knife. I got a call from my lawyer a few days after she filed. "James, we need to talk," he said, his voice grave. "She's coming after you for child support. I suggest we gather as much evidence as we can." That's when it hit me. There was a real chance this child wasn't even mine. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that the timing didn't add up. I hadn't been with Emily much during the time she could have conceived, and if she was sleeping around, there was no telling who the father really was. Kate and I spent countless nights going over everything. I told her about Emily's threats, her manipulations, and the fact that I didn't believe the child was mine. Kate was the only one who knew the full truth about Emily's infidelity. She had witnessed it firsthand, how Emily would disappear, meet strange men, and flirt openly at parties. Kate was ready to stand by me, to help me fight back. But this was no small task. Emily was crafty, and she had everyone else fooled. We needed proof. It wasn't easy to gather evidence. Emily was clever, covering her tracks wherever possible. But Kate, being the closest to her, had seen enough to raise serious doubts. She started documenting every questionable thing she'd witnessed: dates, names, places. It felt like we were building a case against a criminal, but in many ways, that's exactly what this was. Emily, of course, wasn't making things easy. Every interaction was tense, filled with veiled threats and passive-aggressive comments. She acted like the victim whenever the kids were around, making sure they overheard her talking about how I was abandoning them. It was sickening, but I knew better than to engage with her in front of them. I had to stay calm no matter how much it burned me up inside. Then there was Kate. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how different my life could be. She was my refuge, the person who made me feel sane in the middle of all this madness. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the guilt that crept in. Was I doing the right thing by pursuing a relationship with her while everything with Emily was still unresolved? Was I just using Kate to escape from a life that had gone off the rails? The internal conflict gnawed at me. Part of me wanted to just walk away from everything, Emily, the legal battles, the constant manipulation, and start fresh with Kate. But the other part of me knew I couldn't abandon my kids. No matter what happened between Emily and me, they were still my responsibility. And there was this nagging question: what if the child really was mine? I couldn't move forward without knowing the truth. The court hearings were hell. Emily showed up looking every bit the wronged wife, her belly now visibly round with the pregnancy. She played the part perfectly, tearing up at all the right moments, painting me as the unfeeling bastard who had left her in her time of need. I wanted to scream every time she spoke, to stand up and tell the court the truth about what kind of person she really was. But I knew better. Emotional outbursts would only work in her favor. I had to stay composed, had to stick to the facts. My lawyer, fortunately, was a shark. He started presenting our evidence, showing the court that Emily had been unfaithful, that her timeline didn't make sense. And when we mentioned the DNA test, Emily's demeanor shifted. She went from confident to defensive in a matter of seconds. "I don't think that's necessary," she said, trying to maintain her cool. My lawyer pressed. "Mr. James has every right to know if the child is his. If you have nothing to hide, there should be no issue with the test." Emily shot me a look that could have killed. I knew she was pissed. She thought she could control everything, but this was something she couldn't wriggle out of. If the test proved the child wasn't mine, her entire narrative would fall apart. She'd lose the sympathy of the court, the financial support, everything. Still, she fought it. She tried to appeal to the judge, saying how invasive and unnecessary the test was, how it would cause her stress during the pregnancy. But I stood my ground. I had to know. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. The judge finally ruled in my favor. The DNA test would happen after the baby was born. Emily was furious. She stormed out of the courtroom that day, leaving me behind with a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I was about to get my life back. But even with that victory, I was at a crossroads. Kate was becoming more important to me by the day. We weren't just meeting for coffee anymore. We were spending real time together. Dinners, late-night talks, even trips out of town when I needed to clear my head. She was the only person who made me feel like I was worth something, like I wasn't just a pawn in Emily's game. And yes, the physical connection between us had deepened. We weren't sneaking around, but we were no longer just friends. One evening, after a long, brutal day in court, I went to Kate's place. She greeted me with a warm smile and a hug, and I just collapsed into her arms. We didn't talk much at first. She just held me, letting me unwind. We cooked dinner together, drank wine, and for a few hours, I forgot about the chaos that was my life. As the night wore on, we found ourselves sitting on her couch, the conversation slowing down, the wine making everything feel a little softer around the edges. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I realized how much she meant to me. She wasn't just a way out of my miserable marriage. She was someone I genuinely cared about. Without thinking, I reached out and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she moved closer, resting her head on my shoulder. The silence between us was comfortable, but there was an undercurrent of something more, something we hadn't yet fully acknowledged. And then, without saying a word, we kissed. It wasn't rushed or frantic, but slow, deliberate. It felt different than anything I had experienced with Emily. With Kate, there was no anger, no manipulation, just genuine connection. One thing led to another, and soon we were wrapped up in each other, our bodies moving in sync, everything else fading into the background. That night with Kate was different from all the other times we'd been together. It wasn't just about escaping Emily. It was about finding someone who actually saw me for who I was, flaws and all. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely broken after all. But the reality was still waiting for me. The DNA test loomed over everything, and I knew that whatever the outcome, it was going to define the next chapter of my life. If the child was mine, I'd have to find a way to deal with Emily for the rest of my life. But if it wasn't, well, then I was finally free. I just hoped I was ready for the truth. The day of the test results felt like the longest day of my life. I'd been running on fumes for weeks, barely getting by between the court battles, work, and the constant mental tug-of-war with Emily. But today was the day. I was finally going to know if the child she was carrying was mine, or if all of this had been one big, elaborate betrayal. My stomach twisted in knots as I waited in the sterile clinic lobby, tapping my foot nervously against the linoleum floor. Kate had offered to come with me, but I told her I needed to do this alone. As much as she had been my rock through all of this, I had to face the truth by myself. I couldn't lean on her forever, especially with something as monumental as this. When the nurse finally called my name, I felt like my legs were made of lead as I stood up. The walk to the back office was a blur, my mind racing with every possible outcome. And then I was there, sitting across from a man in a white coat holding an envelope that could change my life forever. The doctor's words came out slowly, almost deliberately. "James, the DNA test results are in, and the child is not biologically yours." I didn't know what to feel in that moment. Part of me wanted to collapse with relief, while another part of me wanted to punch a hole through the wall. Emily had been lying to me for months, manipulating me, using the pregnancy to control me, all while knowing this child wasn't mine. The truth hit me hard, but it was also a release. It was over. I was free. I walked out of that clinic feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight that had been sitting on my chest, suffocating me, was gone. It wasn't my child. I didn't owe Emily anything anymore. She couldn't control me, couldn't use the baby as a bargaining chip to keep me tethered to her. I was finally, blessedly free. The first person I called was Kate. I didn't even need to say the words. She could hear it in my voice. "So, it's done?" she asked, a note of caution in her tone. "Yeah," I said, letting out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. "It's done. The baby isn't mine." There was a pause on the line, and then Kate spoke again, softer this time. "James, I'm so happy for you. You can finally move on." Move on. The words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about winning some legal battle or getting one over on Emily. This was about moving forward, about reclaiming my life. And for the first time, I truly believed I could. The revelation. I wasn't about to keep this a secret. Emily had spent months spinning her web of lies, convincing everyone around us that I was the bad guy, the heartless husband abandoning his pregnant wife. But now I had the truth, and I wasn't going to let her continue playing the victim. I called a few close friends and family members first, letting them know what had happened. I kept it short and to the point, no embellishments, no emotional outbursts. The DNA test confirmed that the child isn't mine. Emily's been lying this whole time. The reactions varied. Some were shocked, others angry on my behalf. But the one thing they all had in common was a sense of betrayal. Emily had manipulated not just me, but everyone around her. She had built up this image of herself as the wronged woman. And now, with the truth out, that image was about to crumble. I didn't stop there. I invited a group of friends and acquaintances over for a casual gathering at the house. The same house where Emily and I had once played the role of the happy couple. It felt fitting, in a way, that this would be where I'd reveal her betrayal. When everyone had gathered, I stood in front of them and laid it out. I've been keeping quiet about a lot of things, but you all deserve to know the truth. Emily's been unfaithful for months, and the child she's carrying, it's not mine." There were gasps, murmurs of disbelief. A few people exchanged glances, unsure of what to say. But I wasn't looking for sympathy. I just wanted the truth to be known. I was done hiding, done letting Emily control the narrative. Social condemnation. Word spread fast, faster than I had expected. Within days, Emily's carefully constructed world began to fall apart. Her friends, the ones who had rallied around her during the pregnancy, started to distance themselves. The neighbors who had once whispered about me behind my back were now talking about her, shaking their heads in disgust. The social support system she had relied on for so long was crumbling beneath her feet. I could see the panic in her eyes the next time we met to exchange the kids. She was losing control, and she knew it. Her voice, usually so confident and sharp, was quieter, almost pleading. "James, can we talk about this? Please." There was a time when I would have given in, when I would have sat down and listened to her excuses. But not anymore. "What's there to talk about, Emily? You lied. You used the pregnancy to manipulate me. And now everyone knows the truth." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You didn't have to humiliate me like this." I shrugged. "You humiliated yourself." She tried to justify it, of course. Said she was lonely, that I had pushed her away, that the affair had just happened. But no one was listening anymore. The truth was out, and she had no more cards left to play. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a sense of satisfaction watching her world unravel. For so long, she had controlled everything. How people saw me, how I saw myself. But now, she was the one on the outside, and I was the one holding the power. There was a certain poetic justice to it. But not everything felt like a victory. The consequences. The hardest part of all of this was the kids. They didn't understand what was happening, why mommy and daddy were suddenly living apart, why everyone was so angry all the time. I did my best to shield them from it. But there were days when I couldn't hide the tension. I knew they were suffering, caught in the crossfire of a war they had no part in. And that killed me. I tried to keep things as normal as possible for them. I made sure they still had their routines, their playdates, their time with me. But there were moments, quiet moments, when I could see the confusion in their eyes, and it tore me apart. Emily, for all her faults, still loved the kids. I knew that, but she had lost something in the process of destroying our marriage. Her selfishness, her lies, they had taken a toll on her relationship with them too. They could sense it, even if they couldn't put it into words. They knew something was wrong. In the end, Emily tried to claw back some semblance of her old life. She reached out to a few mutual friends, trying to explain herself, to win back their sympathy. But it was too late. No one wanted to hear her excuses. They had seen who she really was, and there was no going back from that. A new beginning. As for me, I was finally free. Free from Emily's manipulations, from the weight of a relationship that had been suffocating me for years. I spent more and more time with Kate, and we grew closer with each passing day. She was my lifeline, my future, the person who had stood by me through the worst of it. We didn't rush into anything. We took our time, enjoying each other's company, talking about what we wanted for the future. But there was a sense of peace between us, a quiet understanding that whatever came next, we'd face it together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things would turn out okay. The weeks after the revelation felt like walking through a brand new world. One where the air was lighter and the ground beneath my feet more stable. It was over. The war with Emily, the constant manipulation, the toxic environment. It was all in the past now. And with that chapter closed, a new one began, one I never saw coming but felt like I'd been waiting for all my life. Kate and I didn't rush things. After everything that had happened, we both knew it was important to take our time, to build something real and lasting, not just jump into a relationship because it felt like the right next step. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, it became clear that we weren't just passing time together. We were building a life, something solid, something true. We spent our weekends planning out our future, talking about where we'd live, the kinds of trips we'd take, and how we'd blend our lives into something that felt new and whole. It wasn't just about me escaping the ruins of my old life anymore. With Kate, I felt like I was actually building something from the ground up, something I could be proud of. She brought out the best in me. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was living, and with her by my side, I started to believe that maybe I was capable of more than I had ever given myself credit for. She believed in me, and somehow, that made me start to believe in myself again. One evening, after dinner at our favorite little Italian place, Kate looked at me, her eyes sparkling in that way that made my heart feel a little too big for my chest. She seemed nervous, which was unusual for her. Kate was always so composed, so sure of herself. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice soft. I set my wine glass down, suddenly alert. "What is it?" She hesitated for just a moment before the words spilled out. "I'm pregnant." It took a second for it to sink in. Pregnant. Kate was pregnant. I stared at her, my mind racing, my heart doing somersaults in my chest. I wasn't sure what to say at first, wasn't sure how to react, but then I saw the uncertainty in her eyes, like she wasn't sure how I'd take the news. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't like last time. This wasn't Emily using a pregnancy to control me, to keep me trapped. This was something real, something I actually wanted. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "Kate, that's amazing." Her smile was everything. It lit up the room, filled every corner of my heart. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, pure, unfiltered joy. I was going to be a father again, but this time, it was different. This time, it was on my terms with someone who loved me for who I was, not for what I could provide. We sat there for a while, talking about what this meant, about how we'd make it work. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel overwhelmed by the future. I didn't feel trapped or scared or uncertain. I felt ready to step up, to be the father this child deserved, ready to build a family with Kate, to give this baby everything I hadn't been able to give my other kids when things with Emily had fallen apart. A fresh start. In the weeks that followed, Kate and I started to make real plans. We looked at houses together, somewhere outside the city, where we could have a fresh start, away from the memories of everything that had happened. It felt surreal, like I had been given a second chance at life, at love, at happiness. I never thought I'd find myself in this position, especially after everything with Emily. I had been so broken, so lost. And yet here I was, with a woman who saw me, who understood me, and who wanted to build a life with me. Kate's pregnancy brought a sense of purpose back into my life. The ultrasound appointments, the baby name discussions, the way she'd rest her hand on her belly with that soft smile that told me she already loved our child more than anything. It all felt like a dream, one I never wanted to wake up from. The best part? I wasn't alone in this. Kate and I were in it together, partners in every sense of the word. We talked about everything, our fears, our hopes, our plans for the future. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt heavy, especially with the legal battles still lingering in the background with Emily. But no matter how tough things got, I knew we'd get through it. Because this time, I wasn't fighting alone. Moving forward, as the months passed, things with Emily slowly settled down. She was still trying to claw back some semblance of control, but with the truth out, her power over me had evaporated. The court ruled in my favor regarding child support. After all, the child wasn't mine, and she couldn't keep pretending otherwise. Her social circle had all but abandoned her, and the image she had worked so hard to maintain was shattered. There were still moments of tension, especially when it came to co-parenting our kids. But I was doing my best to be there for them, to make sure they knew I was still their father, that I would never abandon them. And as hard as it was, I knew I couldn't let my anger at Emily affect the way I treated my children. They were innocent in all of this. But even with the challenges, life was finally starting to make sense again. I was moving forward, not just surviving day by day, but truly living. Kate and I spent our weekends setting up the nursery, picking out baby clothes and planning for the future. Every time I looked at her, I felt a surge of gratitude, like I had been given a gift I didn't deserve. I never thought I'd find happiness again, but here it was, right in front of me, growing stronger with every passing day. The conclusion. When Kate's due date finally arrived, I was a nervous wreck. I paced the hospital hallway, my hands trembling, my mind racing with every possible scenario. But when I finally held our baby in my arms, everything else faded away. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the pain, not the betrayals. All that mattered was this tiny, perfect life that Kate and I had brought into the world. Looking down at my son, I felt something shift inside me. This was my second chance, not just at being a father, but at being the kind of man I had always wanted to be. The kind of man Kate believed I could be. As I watched Kate cradle our son, her eyes filled with love and exhaustion, I realized something. Despite everything, the hardships, the betrayal, the endless battles, my life had gained new meaning. I wasn't just escaping my past anymore. I was building a future, one filled with love, hope, and possibility. I knew there would still be challenges. Life wasn't suddenly perfect, and the scars from my marriage to Emily would never fully fade. But I was no longer defined by that pain. I was no longer trapped by the mistakes of the past. With Kate by my side and our son in my arms, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope.